Let's see if we have anybody yet. Yeah, oh wow, we have a lot of people. Welcome, guys. As people are filling in, we're really excited you're here today. This is a topic that's particularly special to me, so I'm really looking forward to our discussion. As people are filing in, there's, I think, over 80 people who are going to be joining us today, which is very exciting. If you guys could, in the chat, which is at the bottom bar for any newbies to Zoom, if y'all could just shout out where you're from, where you're watching from, where you work, where you live, what city you rep, that might help us get a little more excited about reaching out to y'all specifically. So where are you guys tuning in from? Hey, Austin, New York City. Oregon, I've never been to Oregon. Any of y'all been to Oregon, panelist?
Oh, yes. I have.
St. Augustine. Oh, that's my mom. Hi, Mom. Michigan, Washington, D.C. This is awesome. Oh my gosh, there's so many of y'all. Hey, ATL. This is great. I think a few more people are funneling in. Scottsdale. I see a lot of DMVers. We're so excited to have y'all here. Tijuana, Mexico, yes. International in this thing. San Francisco, I love it. Wow, we're all over. I love it, guys. Well, we are so happy to have you guys with us here today. Honored, actually. This is a topic that's pretty important to me. Specifically, I feel like I've gone through some values-based career moves that have really honestly changed the trajectory of my life. And so this panel is really going to walk you through exactly the same steps and questions that I walked through with my career coach at the time to get me to where I'm at now. A little bit about me. My name is Janelle Christian. I am a 6th-year associate at Baker Hotsteller in Atlanta. Before Baker, I worked at a law firm in New York. I transitioned after 2 years to their DC office, and now I've been in Atlanta for 2 years. But we have some awesome panelists. I am a mere moderator. I'm very excited for us to introduce the panelists. So if we can go through and let everybody know who you guys are. Katie, let's start with you.
Yeah, thanks. So my name is Katie Aldrich. I am a coach and trainer at Fringe Professional Development. I started my legal career as a litigation associate at a firm in Boston. I did that for about 5.5 years, and then I switched over to professional development in law firms for a few years before starting coaching and starting with Fringe. So I'm really excited to be here talking about this. I love talking about career and career transitions, and values are so important. So I'm happy to be here, and thanks for coming.
I love it. Stanya?
Sure. Thank you everyone for tuning in today. My name is Rustanya Dumorne. I am the manager of lateral recruiting at Locke Lord, which is a worldwide firm. I sit in the firm's Boston office, and I oversee all of the firm's both partner and non-partner attorney recruiting for all of our offices. It is a pleasure to be here today, and I believe that we are going to have a great conversation. So looking forward to it.
Love it. And Anna?
Thank you so much. My name is Anna Saunders, and I practice with a large firm in DC after law school. And about 7 years ago, I transitioned to recruiting with Voy Legal, where I help the attorneys at the associate counsel and partner level manage their career transitions. The lawyers I meet generally fall into 2 buckets. They're either actively looking for career transitions or are doing well or good but. And upon deeper reflection, they can usually imagine something, not just anything, but something that might be able to offer a better fit. And we spend an insane amount of time talking about it. My job only really adds value when I can find a better fit for lawyers. But what I've discovered is that can come in a lot of different ways. As an aside, I talked to professional recruiters a total of 0 times when I was in practice, which was a mistake. Because as I went through my own transition, I had mistaken their initial outreach as incompetence, but I realized my firm web bio had literally keywords from every matter I had ever touched, which made things a little bit confusing. But that's the perspective I'm bringing to the conversation today.
Love it. Awesome. So now you guys have had an opportunity to get to know a little bit of background about all of our panelists. But today we're talking about values-based career transitions. We are in the middle of a global pandemic. There's like an imminent kind of happening recession. There's a ton of social unrest. I think that the gut reaction for folks is to say now is the worst time to ever make some type of transition. But I found that the reality is that most of us are having more clarity than ever into what our values are during this time. And it's also becoming like a screaming important moment that your values align with what you're doing every day. So the questions we're going through today, I think, are going to be really helpful in getting you clear on what your values are, figuring out if your values are in alignment, you know, where you're at, if not, what you need to do, and we're going to get you on the right track. So let's get started. Katie, I think I want to start with you. I think, you know, at the most basic level, there's a ton of lawyers and law firm folks on the panel right now, but to be honest, values are universal, and what we're talking about, you know, can apply to any career. So what would you say are some common values? What are values, and how does someone define those for themselves?
Yeah. So what are values? Like, that's the question, right? It's funny, when I was practicing law, I started working with a coach just to have a better sense of what I wanted for my career. And she asked me this question, like, what are your values? And I had no idea. I had no idea where to start. I didn't know what values were. It's this word that a lot of people just sort of toss around, but when you try to put a definition around it, a lot of us are kind of hard pressed to do it. So I think about values as the qualities, the characteristics, the things that are important to you, that when you have them in your life, you feel like things are going really well. You feel like you have a purpose. You feel like there's meaning. You feel like things are really resonant. And when you don't have them in your life, you don't feel those things. You might feel frustrated, annoyed, stressed out. So it's really important that we identify what our values are. And we can have really a huge number of values, but they all kind of fall on a spectrum, right? And so we really want to identify what we call our core values, which is a handful, you know, maybe 5 or 6 really centrally important values to you that you want to make sure you are maximizing in your life, in your career and outside of your career, because that's what's going to give you that sense of richness, that sense of connection to what you're doing. So some examples of values, it could be things like independence, relationship, generosity, achievement, variety, stability. There really is an infinite list of what values could be. The important thing is for you to figure out what yours are, what your core values are. So why do we care about this? Like, why is this important? Normally, when we don't have them, or when the conditions in our life are such that we can't really maximize our values, or even when other people or our circumstances are actively stepping on our values, we don't feel great, right? We feel irritated, we could feel frustrated, we could feel angry. And if we don't understand what our values are, we feel those feelings, and it can be hard to identify where they're coming from, what's happening. If we go to the level of values, it's then much clearer to say, oh, one of my core values is being actively stepped on, or in my current life situation, I don't have room to express this core value that's so important to me. And once you're able to identify that as the issue, then you have a much clearer roadmap of figuring out what you need to do to alleviate that anger, that frustration, that irritation. So it's really important that you have a good sense of what your core values are. And they also help us just prioritize, right? They help us make decisions in the career transition space. If you're, you know, deciding whether to leave your job or to stay, or deciding between 2 offers, you can look at your values and say, where am I going to be able to maximize these? And that can help you make those hard decisions. It can help make your priorities a little more clear. And just one little nuance I want to throw in, sort of despite what I said about, your life feeling great and on purpose when you have your values, being in alignment with your values doesn't always feel good moment to moment. So an example, if public service is really important to you, if helping individuals is really important to you, maybe you're, a public defender or working in an organization like that, that's really hard work, right? That can be really taxing. It can be really frustrating, stressful. It's not going to put a smile on your face moment to moment. But there's a deeper sense of meaning and connection there for you if that's in alignment with your values, which is a much different feeling than if you're doing hard work and feeling stressed out and feeling burnt out and you don't feel that sense of meaning and purpose and connection. So being in alignment with your values doesn't feel good all of the time, but sort of as a whole, looking back on those tough moments, it has a much more rich and more meaningful quality than if you were sort of feeling just that stress and frustration in absence of being connected with your values.
I love everything you said. I think a lot of folks, when they start to feel that dissonance in their career, they're not sure what it is. And a lot of people automatically assume something's wrong with them, that they're faulty, that they're not enough, that they're not good enough. None of my peers are stressed or, not liking what they're doing. But I think exactly what you said, that's really a trigger to assess your values and where you're working. I'm putting you on the spot a little bit. You don't have to share, but I know we're talking about our values and preparing for this panel. Does anyone want to share some of their top core values? Mine is innovation. That's like my number one. I love innovation.
One of my core values is mentorship. It's really important to have someone that I can go to for guidance or to ask questions and just to kind of help you map out your career goals and where you want to go.
Many of my core values centered around collaboration, the feeling that with my colleagues and people I work with, we are lifting each other up, not competing against one another.
One of mine is variety. Like I like to have different things happening sort of day to day, year to year, month to month. I like to have, not the same day over and over again.
Yeah, I love all this. For anyone watching, if this is your first time even considering, if you've never thought about what your core values are, we actually have a resource for you that we'll be sending out after this panel, so you can go through and create. Oh, look how fancy. I think it's on the screen for you. Technology around here. This values assessment sheet will be sent to you after the panel, so that you guys can go through and help identify some of your core values yourself too. So next question, why would you consider values as part of a career transition? Ms. Tanya, what would you tell people about that?
Sure. So for many of us, we spend a lot of time at work. The standard 9-to-5 job is kind of starting to fizzle out, and a lot more people are working a lot more hours, especially in the legal career. Attorneys definitely, they have to bill a large amount of hours. And in the time that we find ourselves in right now, where people are now working from home because of the pandemic, the lines between work and home are starting to kind of merge together and blend. So you definitely want to make sure that you are in a job where you feel welcomed and you feel valued. And you want to be somewhere where your values are prioritized, because at the end of the day, when you're looking for that extra motivation or that extra drive to continue to persevere and to persist, it has to be more than just the job itself. It has to be about the reason behind it, the why. And a lot of times it's the values and knowing that your employer is working hard to prioritize your values that will give you the extra push to persist and keep going on.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Anna, do you have anything to add? Why consider values as part of your transition?
So that your transition is going to actually make things better. Sometimes it's that feeling of dissonance with your values that gets you to sort of start looking for a new opportunity. But even if it's not actively bothering you, it's not consciously if you're going to go ahead and make a change, and a career change is usually a pretty big one, it is a phenomenal time to check it, know yourself. There's really nothing, no piece of knowledge more valuable than that. But this values worksheet that was put up on the screen, I have done it myself, and I really wish that had been available to me. As an anecdote, I joined a top-notch practice with a firm that I sought out because they were an amazing First Amendment shop. And their reputation was fantastic. I'd done every clinic and every law school class to prepare for this. But the reality was, I did not love the day-to-day life of a litigator at all. I didn't like solitary writing very much, and it was not a good fit. I very quickly found my people in a completely separate regulatory grab bag group. But being aware of sort of how I like to interact with people and the importance of connection, being sent to my room office to go write things, I had thrown all of my eggs into I wanted meaning. I wanted it to be really important work doing something good in the world. And I had really overlooked what recharges my batteries day to day. And I was incredibly lucky that I was able to just sort of swerve off into a much, much, much better situation. But it's situations like that where you see that knowing yourself and knowing what's going to give you that feeling of, integrity and alignment it's not, making a career transition is hard. So you want to do a really, really good one so you don't have to do it again. That's my feeling.
I agree 100%. I feel like when you first feel that dissonance of like, oh, this isn't working anymore, you think, maybe it's just me, but I thought, oh, it's the people I'm with. Like, they are crazy. I just need to find some non-crazy people. But I think the reality is, it's really values. If you don't want to go through this process again, you need to really consider what exactly both of y'all just said. So that's awesome. And so now we've got, go ahead.
What I was going to say is that what's interesting is that there are a lot of opportunities that you find that they're really wrong for someone in them currently, or it's not right. But if you have really good knowledge about sort of what that looks like, then you can find folks for whom that is exactly what they're looking for. So, there's whether it's working with somebody on a team who one of us finds it very difficult to work with, but the other person, it's a very smooth professional relationship. But those, values are important.
Definitely. I think, now we've defined values, we figured out why we need them. I think the next question is, like, is it okay to ask an employer? Like, are you overstepping, interview etiquette by asking about values and inquiring about values for your employer? And also, like, how do you really identify what those are? Like, how do you get in that interview and say, like, this is really values issues, or this is just like a PR pamphlet you're giving to folks? Sonia, I'm interested.
Sure. I don't think that it's overstepping. It actually really truly shows the employer a different side of you, and it allows for, when you're in the interview, to have a more candid and genuine conversation. A lot of times in my current position right now, I review a lot of the interview feedback that when attorneys, they have a interview and kind of looking at the feedback, one of the things that really sticks out to me is just, this person had all of the great credentials, but they weren't the right cultural fit, or they wouldn't work with well with the people that are already here. So asking about values with your employer in the interview, it gives not only the employer a sense of what your values are, but they also can give you a sense of what the values of the organization are. And that way it's able to help make not only you, but also the employer can also make a more informed decision about whether or not this would be the right place for you. And in terms of figuring out what the values of an organization is outside of the interview, do your research. So for example, before you go to the interview, you can look at the LinkedIn of the people that you're going to interview with. Look at the organizations that they're following. see if they serve on any boards or what are they involved in. That will give you a sense of what's important to them, and then you can ask about that and be more informed before the interview so you know exactly what to ask and what to talk about. Look at other organizations the organization that you're interviewing for, who do they sponsor? Who do they partner with or collaborate with? That will also give you a sense of what's important to them, because if the mission of the other organization was not important to them, they wouldn't be collaborating with them or partnering with them.
Yeah, that's that LinkedIn tip is really good. Okay, Anna, I'm interested from you. You're, working in recruiting, you do this day in and day out. What are tips that you give people to really talk about values in the interview?
I am so glad you asked. I spend a lot of time doing interview prep with people. And when anyone is preparing, I remind people that this is your opportunity to interview the group and people that you'll be working with as much for their fit for you as your fit for them. So at a baseline, you have to be able to solve a problem and meet a need that they're having. But this is also a really good opportunity to assess how well they're going to fit you. So generally, I recommend open-ended questions, but not too open. If you ask a partner, I think it can be really intimidating. If you ask someone, what are your organization's values? A lot of people just won't know how to answer that. They're not trying to hold something back. I don't know what words to, goodness, greatness. I think it's a very difficult question to put somebody on the spot for. Or just too broad. They don't know how to be responsive to that question. However, if you're interested in, if you might want to ask, I'm interested in doing a particular kind of work, how does that work get handed out? It gives them an opportunity to tell you things that will speak to how much of a sort of an entrepreneurial, go get your own thing kind of an atmosphere is it? Or is it strictly regimented and doled out on a system? Or is it sort of how that works is going to tell you a lot about the culture there and sort of whether it's going to be a fit for you. So I like to talk about, or I see your group works with a lot of life sciences clients. At what point do you expect an associate to manage work or relationships with a given client? Will tell you not just the answer to that question, it will tell you sort of how they see developing their lawyers. Are they trying to push responsibility and independence quickly? Are they reserving that for really more senior folks? Do you feel, do they want you to put in a lot of time doing more road activities? And there are no right answers to anything, just asking that kind of open-ended question that allows them to offer those things. My other favorite thing is to ask about individuals' particular personal experiences. Because if you ask someone sort of, how are things for female associates in this group, that's difficult to say. They can really only speak to how has this been for you. And again, not that they wouldn't want to give you the information you're looking for, but asking people about themselves is often the pathway, the gateway into all the information you really wanted. So especially, to Wistania's point, if you have done your homework, you will often know things like, I see you lateraled from this other firm. What was the most important factor bringing you here? What was the hardest thing about your transition? They can answer those questions, and you can, connect some dots about, is my situation like your old situation? So I think people, again, they want to help you find the right answer, and how something will be for you involves a lot of guesswork, but they can speak with great authority on their own experiences. So open-ended questions, personal experience.
I love it. Yeah, I agree. I know a bunch of people on here are lawyers or in the legal field. And for me, in my last transition, something I was looking for was a lot more balance. So I literally planted a trap in my resume along the lines of what Anna was saying, where I put something silly like puppy. It was literally puppy psychology in my interest section. 100% of people who interviewed me asked me, what the heck is puppy psychology? So that was a great like segue for me to talk about how obsessed with my dog I am, how important my dog is, how like if my dog gets sick, you should expect me to leave work like it was my child. Like I was allowed to like really talk about a personal space, and then it really opened up the door to say, well, what about you? What's important in your life? What do you do on the weekends? And I could very easily ask them, you know, we just laughed about how puppy psychology was fake, but it was a very easy segue to then say, well, tell me about your personal life since you want to ask about mine. And I thought that was a really low lift way to get in. Okay.
Well played.
I know, I try. Katie, it's time for you to coach us a little bit. So should I be looking for an employer who has the exact same values that I do?
Not necessarily. I think it's more important to look for an employer whose values are complementary to your values. Because as you go through that worksheet that we're going to send you and you identify your core values, you'll see that some of them just are, you know, by nature more individual, right? Not necessarily organizational type values. So an example, if a core value for you is independence, probably you're not going to find an employer where independence is a stated core value. But you want to be looking for an employer where maybe there are values around understanding and welcoming employees to bring their whole selves to work, right? Understanding that employees have interests and hobbies and lives outside of the office. So the employer gives time and gives space and gives understanding and gives encouragement for that, right? So maybe that type of an organizational value of welcoming in the whole person as an employee is going to complement your core value of independence. So you want to look for employer values that are complementary to your own values. And you don't want to take your list of core values and use it almost as a checklist. Because you'll see you'll have values that really can't be addressed at work, right? If you have a value around relationship, family, adventure, travel, right? Like maybe your employer isn't going to be providing, you know, adventurous travel opportunities for you, but you want to find an employer that's going to give you the time and the space so that outside of work you can pursue those things. So you don't necessarily need to find an employer that's going to provide the space, going to provide directly the space for your core values in your, you know, working situation, but you want to make sure your employer is going to provide the work situation that is conducive to you living the parts of your life outside of work that will set the conditions for you to realize some of those values. So look for complementary values, not necessarily one-to-one matches.
I love that. I have a ton of follow-up questions, but I would like to let our audience know that if you guys have questions as we're going, you are more than welcome to ask us in the Q&A box. You can ask us, we'll try to answer them as we go, but we'll also have a Q&A section at the end. Okay, Katie, you have my full attention. That is everything you just said, 100% I agree with. I think for some people, again, going back to like, you just can't tell if it's a values thing. If something just kind of feels off in your current role, how would you recommend to someone to help identify that root cause?
Yeah, so as we kind of alluded to earlier, knowing what your values are is really going to be step one. Having that clear understanding that this set of core values, these are my non-negotiables. And then you want to do almost an inventory. Think about all of the things that you do at work. Maybe you're a supervisor in some matters. Maybe you're doing a lot of research. Maybe you're working in teams. Think about all of the places and contexts that you find yourself in at work, and give yourself a rating on a 1 to 10. Like for each of your core values, is this showing up in your life at a 10? Is it showing up at a 1? Is it, you know, sort of negative, like not there at all and actually being actively tamped down? Do that for everything that you do at work, and also add in things outside of work, right? Like as how you're spending whatever time you might have outside of work. For some people, unfortunately, not a lot of time, but to the extent you have time outside of work and you're doing activities and spending time with people, give yourself that assessment. Are your values showing up? Which values aren't showing up? If you're feeling like things are kind of off, really good chance that some of your really core values are not being recognized, right? They're not manifesting to the way that you need it to feel like you're in alignment and on purpose. So doing that just quick assessment, you don't have to be really scientific about it. You don't have to follow any particular set of instructions, but just take a look at your core values, take a look at everything you're doing at work, everything you're doing outside of work. Give yourself a 1 to 10, which values are showing up, which values aren't showing up. And then think about what you can do to change your circumstances so that those values that are being tamped down have more room to shine, have more room to grow, have more room for you to experience them.
I love that 100%. As someone who, like I said, had a very similar, career values-based transition, I just felt like that feeling like something's off is the first signal, is when and you fight it and you don't want to, but, and I know there's a ton of lawyers in the audience. If you feel like something's off, it's okay to explore some other options. It's okay. There's a ton of people on this panel here who are ready, willing, and excited to explore those options with you. I promise you, as someone in your shoes, that there are other options for you. And starting with your values is a good place to go. But okay, Katie, again, you're on the money. I'm just going to keep on with you. I promise, panelists, I'm coming back to y'all. I feel like a lot of people's number one argument is, okay, I've defined my values. I know what my values are, but that's not going to pay me any money. So what would you say to someone who says, my core values aren't going to pay the bills?
So my number one question when clients come to me with some version of this is, how do you know? We live so much of our lives based on assumptions that we have, assumptions about what our job is going to look like, what other jobs might look like, how much money we need, how much money we can make at other places. And the question for all of those is, how do you know? And until you do the research, until you really talk to people and understand what other types of opportunities are out there, especially if you are coming from law school, going into a firm, maybe haven't had another job, haven't had much other career experience. And I was in this boat, so I could speak from my own experience. You really don't know what you don't know, right? We only have a limited perspective of what other opportunities there are and our assumptions about how much we might make in those other opportunities. And in reality, there are so many opportunities, infinite. You can't even possibly try to imagine them all or make a list of them all, just sitting at your desk trying to figure this out. So it's so important to talk to people. It's so important to ask questions. It's so important to be open-minded and let your values and your needs really guide your decision-making process. And money is real, right? Like, we all need money. But instead of, being in this sort of world of vagueness and ambiguities where we know we need a lot, but we don't really know what that is, but we don't think we can get it anywhere else from a big firm or from, a big corporation. Like, be really specific. Like, how much money do you actually need to live? How much money would you need to feel, secure and stable? How much money would feel luxurious and amazing? Like, understand that for yourself. And then do the research, like, find out what other opportunities are out there and what financially those might look like. Really question your assumptions at every step of this process.
Y'all don't realize that Katie just dropped pure gold on you. So I hope everyone was taking notes. Anna, I'm interested in your perspective because I feel like I said exactly what I just asked Katie to my recruiters before I moved to Atlanta. I was like, nah, I can't leave DC. These checks are too big. There's no Atlanta money happening. What is your response to people when they come to you like that?
I also hear this very frequently, and there is merit to the question, but my response is generally, do you know where you want to work? And do you know what they would pay you for your current skill set? And the answer is almost always no. It's true. Big law, medium law, regional law, boutique law, they all have different pay scales, as do in-house, government, and nonprofits. And I found that lawyers finding new jobs, I mean, the potential compensation covers a really big range. And oftentimes, what I notice, though, is that what a person sets out looking for often doesn't match what they end up taking. As far as advice, the big theme from this question that I want to push is that you should always take the meeting. You will be pleasantly surprised, or you'll have a really good story. One of those two. And I see a lot of folks who we start out in a place where they say, I have no interest in anything but in-house. And so they go through the process and they get an offer, maybe two. And at the end of the day, they look at those numbers and say, hard pass. And other folks who've said, nothing under New York market is gonna work for me. I got bills to pay. And they end up with a couple of firm offers and just nothing really clicks for them. And they end up somewhere that they really didn't expect to end up. And everyone, I think, was quite sincere and in the initial position there. The consistent thing that I found is that lawyers who know what all the options are tend to make the decisions that they're happiest with later. Sometimes it matches expectations and sometimes it does not. Being in dire straits doesn't usually help people make cool, clear, calculated career moves. So sort of waiting until things are not good and being on a tight timeline isn't ideal. But again, I want to echo what Katie says is do your research. And as far as I'm concerned, that research is go out and get the offer. As soon as you have the number in hand, you can fix the rest of your life to make it work. It sounds like you ended up moving to Atlanta, even though that was not what you had initially thought was going to be the plan.
Yeah, definitely. I think to take two bits from both what Katie and Anna just said, I moved to Atlanta. That was never my plan. I got a call. Someone was talking about Atlanta, and I had heard lots of legal gossip that the Atlanta market's so small, and I can't do the type of law I do in Atlanta, and I'll never get paid the same. And not to be TMI, but I get paid the same, and I do the same type of work, and I live in Atlanta, and my life's awesome. So I think their points are, one, figure out how much money you really need, and two, take the meeting because you don't actually know any of the facts, and all that legal gossip floating around is not to your benefit. Okay, enough about me. Wustania, I'm interested. We kind of touched on this, on really digging into the law firms. But how do you really parse out whether an organization really lives up to its values or if it's really, really good marketing?
Right. So when interviewing at firms, a lot of information is thrown at you from, for example, at Locke Lord, they have a lot of one-pagers that talk about the different practice groups, and a lot of information is being thrown at you, and there's a lot of things to parse through and weed out. But my advice would be to talk to people. People are the best way to get the most information about the organization. You can continue to do research online and look through various articles and things like that, but they will always portray the best image of the organization that way. So in speaking with people, not just during the interview, but for example, if you know anybody who works at the organization, or if you have connections on LinkedIn that know people that work at the organization, reach out to your connections, reach out to those people and really ask those questions and really have a conversation with them to get that information. Or if you know of other organizations that they sponsor or that they partner with, reach out to people that work at those organizations and ask about what their experience is with the people at that organization.
I love that tip. I think using your network is invaluable. I didn't go to one single interview that I didn't have someone personally, vouch for someone at the firm that could either they knew something about the firm or they could put me in contact with someone they trusted, so therefore I could talk to them. I think that's a fantastic tip. I agree. Anna, what would you say?
I 100% agree. And I feel like good marketing is valuable. It does mean that someone somewhere thought that those values were worth publicizing. It's not everything. It's a start. and in terms of telling the difference between what organizations are maybe paying lip service to things that are important to you and those firms who are really committed, it is tricky. I love this, reach out to your connections, ask people. I also want to, I would say also do your research. The same research that Vustanya recommended for in answer to an earlier question is go to the website, read the materials. Are there affinity groups? Are they sponsoring people? So often there is more content than you can wrap your head around. You can get the headline speeches from different events, like they're all available. So seeing what partners or groups are active on LinkedIn, what kind of content they're putting out there. If there's content in an area, it means somebody's been spending time and money and energy making it so. And sometimes your research will reveal things like there are only X number of female or diverse partners in a given group or firm. And I feel like facts that you can find out like that are an entrance. And it's worth asking the questions everywhere you are, because given the same set of facts, some firms will be actively recruiting pipelines and sort of have a commitment to a plan so that the future might look different. And other firms are, that sounds interesting, we're going to wait and see about that. So you can learn a lot from finding out the facts and then again reaching out to the people there to see what their take is. We live in an age of technology. Let's use it.
I agree. I see all of y'all's questions. I'm saving a couple of them for the end, but there's one that's relevant now that I think we should answer as a panel. Someone asked, would you suggest reaching out to people in the company on LinkedIn directly, even if you don't have connections there? Sonia, Anna, what would you guys say to that?
I would say that there is no harm in doing that. You should just go for it. The worst the person can say is no, so why not just, try and see what happens.
My thought on that is it depends what you're trying to do. Have you applied for a job there? Are you trying to find out about the company to find out whether it would be a good place for you? Again, as you've mentioned, it's a pretty low stakes way to do things. I find it sometimes is more useful if you have a very directed ask. If it's not somebody you know already, if you are preparing for an interview, you can reach out to somebody who maybe isn't on your interview schedule, but you can say, hi, I have something scheduled next week and I had a few questions if you have a minute about blah. Because people, again, tend to respond to focused asks, not just like, hi, do you want to connect as a general matter? Because they're like, I guess. But when you can ask them something specific, people are oftentimes really open to helping.
One thing I want to add to that is it's helpful if you don't know the people. It's helpful if you give a little bit of background, like they were saying, and have a specific ask. But then also don't be offended or extra pushy if the person doesn't respond to you. So I barely use LinkedIn. I get on LinkedIn like once a month for this panel. This was like the most I've ever gotten on LinkedIn. And I saw that I had hundreds of messages just because I don't use it. And so I would hate for someone to take that personally or to be upset or to think that it was intentional in any way. LinkedIn is not my main mode of communication, although I know it is for a lot of people. So maybe also keep that in mind too when you're reaching out to folks. That's my little tip. Okay. I think the biggest question that a lot of people have right now is, this is all well and great. I'm with y'all. Values all the way. I need them to align. I have defined that my values don't align with my employer, but like it's a recession that, Corona's happening. I'm stuck. What am I supposed to do? I'm interested, especially Katie, what would you say to someone who knows their values don't align, but feel like they're kind of trapped and they can't leave?
So step number one, as I said before, question those assumptions. If a client came to you and said, I want to do X, Y, Z, very rarely would you say no and walk away, end of conversation, right? You would figure out a way to make it happen. You would figure out a way to make some of it happen, right? And yet when it comes to ourselves, we put ourselves in this space of, oh, I can't leave. I'm trapped. I'm stuck here. That's not the end of the conversation. You really need to interrogate why you think that is. Why do you feel like that is? Is it the recession? Is it you feel like nobody's hiring? Is it you feel like you need the money right now? Get really specific. Question, question, question. And if it really turns out that this is not a great time for you to make a career transition, which it might not be, just tell yourself, I can't leave yet, right? You're not stuck there forever. You just can't leave yet. And think really clearly about giving yourself a timeline, right? When might it make sense for you to make a move? Even if it turns out maybe you need to stay for a year or 2 years, and even that feels overwhelming, going through this process of being really specific about why you're staying, what staying is getting you, and what you need to feel like you can leave and what that timeline is will make the time of your staying there much more palatable, right? Because now you're putting some ownership around it, right? You're making the affirmative choice to stay for a particular reason because it's getting you something, as opposed to feeling trapped and like you have no control and you have no power. So that's step one. Step two, if you're going to stay for a certain amount of time, think about what you can change in your current circumstance that's going to bring you more in alignment with your values, that's going to maybe shift things a little bit. Maybe that's changing offices, changing practice groups, going to a different type of schedule, maybe going to a non-partner track type role, maybe going to a different type of role in the firm that's maybe, non-legal or, legal adjacent. What are things that you might be able to change in your current situation that's going to help alleviate whatever dissonance you're feeling? Or maybe you can address something, with the firm, right? Or with your supervisors. Maybe there's a firm value that you're seeing the firm isn't living up to, right? Maybe you can raise that, and maybe you can work with the firm to remedy that in some way. So that's step two. And then the third thing is you really need to take care of yourself, right? This is when making sure that you are okay is super important. As Anna said earlier, looking for a job when you are in dire straits, when you are completely burnt out, when you have no emotional energy left, is really hard. And if you're in that state when you're trying to make that transition, a year off or 2 years off, it's not going to lead you to the next best place, because you're just going to be running away from, your current trapped situation. You're not going to be thinking clearly. You're not going to have that emotional energy to really do the research, do the work, figure out the place that's going to be best for you. So you want to do what you can to take care of yourself. And for me, it really comes down to setting boundaries. So if you know that you're only going to be at a place for another year or another 2 years, you're not, trying to become partner. You're not trying to become equity partner, right? You're not trying to, be the star of the firm, because you're going to leave. So how does that impact how you do your work? And I'm not saying that, turn into a total slacker and stop trying and, just write everything off. But if you are in a habit of feeling like you need to respond to every email as soon as you get it at all hours, maybe you can tell the people that you're working with, hey, I have a commitment every Thursday night from 5 to 8, and I'm not going to be able to check email. Like, set that boundary. And there will be some consequences, right? You might have to have a discussion about that with some people. Some people might be annoyed, but keep in mind, this is a place this is a place you've decided you don't want to be. This is a place you're going to leave at some point. It's okay to not give that A+ effort if that A+ effort is leading you to a place that is not good for you as a human and as a person, and is ultimately not going to be good for your career, because you're not going to be able to make a transition to something that's going to serve you. So it might be controversial and it's hard to do. I understand that it's a lot easier to talk about setting boundaries than to actually set them. And setting boundaries is not a one-time event, right? You have to keep reinforcing them and convince yourself that it's important to reinforce them. But I think that if you are in a place that is really not in alignment with you, and that you want to leave, but you can't leave immediately, you need to be there for a while, you really have to take care of yourself and make sure that you are putting yourself in the best position to make the move when you're able to make it.
You know, and I say that Katie just laid out like the exact roadmap that I've used in every one of my transitions. That was literally it. And two things that she said that I want to kind of echo and reinforce. One is the boundaries piece. That was the first thing I did. When I realized that I wasn't in alignment with my former job, I set a boundary. And it was, in hindsight, a ridiculous boundary. I said, I'm going to stop working at midnight. At midnight, I'm not going to respond to any emails. Like, what kind of crazy person has to say midnight is the time you're going to stop working? But that's what I said. And that was the first boundary I set. And then you could start building. One thing she said was, you might receive some pushback. The biggest pushback I received was in my own head. Almost no one said anything to me. It was absolutely okay that I told people I would get to them in the morning. So boundaries, number one. The second thing you said that I thought was really interesting was broach the conversation possibly with your employer, like you're leaving anyway. And so I'm interested, Wustania, in your perspective there. Like, if you've identified a values-based issue, either that, you know, the company, the firm has a value that they're not living up to properly, or that there's something you think is off that they should be doing better, should you, and how do you best approach that conversation with your organization?
Sure. So if this is definitely a place that you see that you want to stay or you're not able to leave right away, I would definitely go about trying to make effective change. First, I would say write down your thoughts and organize them. So put together some type of proposal or formal document and write down, for example, let's say one of the values is work-life balance. Write why it's important to you and some ideas of how the organization can go about realizing that value. Next, I would talk to your colleagues about it. Talk to other people in other departments. Share what you wrote down with them to try to see if anybody else agrees with you and try to garner that support. I find that leadership is more inclined to listen if there's a united front and there's multiple people and you have that support. Third, try to see if there are any other committees or boards or groups within the organization that deal with similar values or things that kind of overlap or align. Reach out to the chair of the committee, or if you have a mentor, reach out to the mentor and kind of share your ideas with them and see if you can get their support that way. Or with chairs of committees, given their title and their position, they have a little bit more weight within the organization, so they can bring it, a step up. Or other people to reach out to, for example, in the law firm world, if within your office, the office managing partner or the office administrator, you can reach out to them and share that formal document that you put together and go together with your colleagues and really make a presentation, or making sure that you have that unite front. And once they see that, this is very important to you, you wrote it down, it's very organized, it's clear, it shows that this is something that's very serious and that they should address it, especially since a lot of people agree with it as well.
I think that's awesome advice. I want to make sure we get enough time for Q&As for folks, because we have a lot of questions that are coming in. One question, it looks like there are some folks in attendance who actually are working in the recruiting space. So one question for the panelists is, how can I accurately convey my organization's values as I'm recruiting talent? And I'm interested in that, Anna and Wustania, from y'all's point of view.
So I think one of the most important things you can do is use your connections. And as an employer, how are you getting, where are you getting your candidates from? If there are recruiters that you use, it is absolutely worth it to sit down one-on-one or over the phone to have a longer conversation about the firm's values. Like, the people who are bringing you your job candidates have a unique platform. So the number one, I really think it's important to talk to, it's good to talk to anyone who will listen, but the people who are bringing you job candidates have a vested interest in listening carefully. So that's one of the ways that I really strongly support. Wustania?
Sure. I would say as the recruiter, kind of create one-page marketing pieces that kind of highlight the values, and share them with potential candidates or share them with external recruiters that are recruiting for your organization. Provide some of the interviewers specific talking points regarding the organization's core values. Partner up with marketing and making sure that they're sharing the work that the organization is doing via social media. And then also making sure that on the website, there's like a dedicated space that talks about some of the organization's core values.
Yeah, I agree. Another great question we got that I really, really want to make sure we have time for is, the biggest factor holding me back from making a big change is the loyalty that I feel to my company or employer. How do I move past the fear or potential guilt of disappointing colleagues and managers? If that ain't a real question, I don't know what is. Does anybody want to take that first?
I'd like to jump in because that is something that people I work with are very, very, it's at the top of mind. And I think that occasionally people are thinking of the job search and career transitions. You know, if you think of it as leaving will be a disappointment, I will let people down who have been depending on me, that's a hard thing. Nobody likes it. So I often work with folks to figure out how to make transitions and leave those bridges intact, if not stronger. Almost every bar, you know, every bar is a teeny tiny bar. It's all a small, small world. These are the same people you'll be on the other side of the table from for years. So, but people have to be able to make transitions. And sort of what's funny is that as lawyers get more and more senior, they tend to like, sometimes watching partners have their other partners depart, like they can easily wish them well, see the goodness of the transition for that person, and like it's less of a thing. I see even more of it like in more junior folks who haven't made a transition or two or watched people transition and still have them be close professional contacts on the other side of the negotiating table or the trial table. So it's a lot in how you think of it, because it's not inherently disloyal. It is all in how you think about it. And in a lot of ways, how you choose to talk about, like when you're making a transition, you can actually use that opportunity, I think, to strengthen the relationships you have with people at your old firm. Because there are often people who you respect and value, and you want them to be part of your network and friends, possibly. So that's a brief take on that.
I think that's absolutely right. I would just, echo reframing and remember that this is all a business, right? Like we're all here doing a job. And I think you want to think about sort of organizational loyalty and your individual relationships sort of separately. As lawyers, when we're working crazy hours and in these really intense situations with people, we have really deep relationships with a lot of our colleagues and our coworkers. And so to know that we might be leaving and they're going to be stranded on a matter and have to pick up the slack, from a personal relationship perspective, that is really hard. So you, as Anna said, you can do what you need to do to make sure that, that individual isn't feeling sort of stranded, that personal relationship isn't going to suffer. But keep in mind, right, this is the work world. People are meant to leave. People are meant to transition. And, as you do it, as you go from different places, you get more comfortable with it. You sort of see that this is just how it happens. You see people leave and it's okay, right? It's what happens. So I think reframing it for yourself and really, people might be sad that you're leaving. People might be disappointed. That's real. That's a reflection of you and how important and valuable you are. But they also wish you well, right? They want you to develop and they want you to succeed. So I think just keeping that in mind and like, don't let that hold you back. Really focus on your values, focus on what's important to you. Why are you making this transition? And manage your relationships along the way.
I love it. I want to be conscientious of everyone's time. Will y'all give me a nod? It's 5:01. Can we answer one or two more if you guys have time? Yeah, okay, awesome. This one's really good. What do you do if all the reviews you're seeing online says that the employer has terrible culture, that employees don't last there more than a year or two, but in your interview experience, it's been super pleasant and everyone's been relatively nice. How do you reconcile, what you see on the interweb and what you're actually experiencing?
All right, I'll take that.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry. I'll be quick. I would just say that everyone has their own experience with the employer, and not to completely take what somebody else's experience is, and don't think that that's going to be your experience. A lot of times when people make the transition or they leave, sometimes it wasn't the best experience, and sometimes they just feel angry and they want to go online and just start writing things and airing it out on there. But if you feel that this will be the right fit for you, you should go ahead and do it. Just making sure that you go the extra mile, do your research, and talk to as many people as possible. See if you can set up follow-up interviews, or try to see if you can set up more informal interviews, like lunch interviews or coffee interviews, just to get further confirmation that this will be the right fit for you.
Yes, indeed. All of that precisely. And I would take it a step further and in some cases ask about it. Say, first check up. Do they really have a retention problem? Are they losing associates? These things could be found out. If there does seem to be pretty high turnover, but that doesn't match your experience with them being a warm, welcoming, fantastic place to work, find the person who is either in a position to answer that question or that you feel comfortable broaching it with and say, hey, Glassdoor has some fairly distressing tales of, really high employee turnover. Is that something you've seen? Is that real? And what is the firm's or the organization's take on that? Because sometimes it'll be, for this kind of a practice group, that level of turnover is perfectly normal, less than the industry average. And in other cases, it might be there really is high turnover, but it can be explained for these reasons, and things are different now. So that was true at one time, but it isn't true now. Or it was true for this salty person on the internet who wrote the thing, but that was in our Denver office where things are very, very different, and we're working on it, but this office is completely different. There's a million different ways that people can address something like that. And when you feel that disconnect, I always feel like I want to get somebody inside the organization's take on how it can be best explained.
I love that. I think that answers kind of our last question, which was, if you're interviewing with a legal department and they're portrayed as having a bad culture, what are questions that you can ask? I think what Anna said, just ask dead on. So an example, when I was interviewing for my job in Atlanta, there was a firm the day before the interview that had like a really awful racial thing that happened, and it was published in Above the Law. And so when I sat down, I went through the interview with everybody. I asked my questions. I proved to them that I was very smart and qualified. And the issue that happened at like a company retreat over a game of bingo. And so at the end of the interview, they're like, do you have any questions? And I was like, yeah, how was bingo? And it was funny because they all would laugh, and it kind of put them on the spot to be like, how are you going to address this? How are you going to handle race? Can you talk about race with me? Are you uncomfortable? Are you going to lie and say it didn't happen? It actually really highlighted a lot of values right there. And if me asking a question made them uncomfortable, it's almost like, I don't know if I want to work there. I don't know if I'm wanting to work somewhere where I can't just frankly ask the things that I want to ask and have straight up answers. Does anyone else have any tips about how to specifically address like specific questions to ask? No? Okay, well, let's wrap up. We're already over. If all of you guys, there were a lot of people who were chatting and asking for us to go a little deeper into our own personal stories and journeys and how we got here. So if you guys wouldn't mind sharing like the best way that people can reach out to you, either on social media or email, however people, if they want to continue the conversation. Katie?
Yeah, so the best way to reach out is LinkedIn. I do check my messages fairly frequently. So LinkedIn, I'm on there, easy to find, Katie Aldrich. And also my email is katie@fringepd.com. You can find me on the Fringe PD website. And I'm happy to follow up with any of you, answer any more questions, go more in depth. I obviously love talking about this stuff, so happy to do it.
I love it. Vistanya?
Sure. So same as Katie, you can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Wustani Dumorne, and also via email, which is my first name dot my last name at locklord.com. So feel free to reach out with any questions. I'm happy to respond and continue the conversation.
Anna?
In a not so stunning not deviation, I too can be reached on LinkedIn. I'm also I try to be really good about LinkedIn. It's not my first form of communication, but I'm an email animal. It's asaunders@voilegal.com, and Voilegal has a webpage with a team, and you can find my pretty face and my email address and my phone number all right there on the internet. And I'm, again, happy to expand on anything, answer questions afterwards.
I love it. I told y'all innovation was one of my values, so I'm going to go ahead and throw a wrench. The best way to reach me is going to be on Instagram. You guys can reach me at HeyJNicole, Hey, the letter J is in my first name, and Nicole, Nicole. You can DM me, you can reach out to me, you'll find me there. And then also you can find me on LinkedIn, but I don't recommend it because I probably won't respond to you. But we are so happy. I think that kind of concludes, our program today. I thought it went wonderful. If you want to finish the conversation with any of us, continue the conversation with any of us, we would love that. That's why we're all here. We're all very passionate in wanting to help as many people as we can get to a place where they feel like their values align with what they're doing every day. So thank you to our panelists. You guys were fantastic. Personally, I can say I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I hope everyone watching enjoyed it as well. So thanks, everyone.